Hey y'all, this is Dr. Joy from the Therapy for Black Girls podcast. And this is a booster session. As a reminder, the information included is meant to be educational and entertaining, but is not a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. Hey y'all, thanks so much for joining me for a special bonus episode of the Therapy for Black Girls podcast. We'll jump into the conversation right after a word from our sponsors. This segment is sponsored by Novo Nordisk. The pandemic changed our relationship with our bodies. We had new routines, our gyms closed, our stress increased, and sadly, many people who are struggling with weight gain and weight regain are afraid to talk with their physicians in fear of being humiliated or talked down to. Despite what you might hear, weight itself is actually about so much more than diet and exercise. There's also science behind weight loss that may be making weight maintenance a challenge. So if you're struggling right now, we encourage you to work with a healthcare provider who can help develop a weight management plan that works for you. A 2019 study commissioned by Dove found that Black women are 1.5 times more likely to be sent home from work because of their hairstyle. These findings led Dove to co-found the Crown Coalition. Crown stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. Along with other members of the coalition, Dove is committed to the passage of the Crown Act. This legislation protects against race-based hair discrimination in schools and the workplace. Help Dove and the Crown Coalition make race-based hair discrimination illegal in all 50 states. Sign the Crown Act petition today at dove.com/crown. When it comes to building a working world that is diverse, equal, inclusive, and fair, we've come a long way, and yet we're just getting started. Now Glassdoor helps to create a more transparent workplace with tools that encourage open conversations among employees as well as job seekers. Get the inside scoop about salaries and company culture, and join an open conversation in a trusted community that can help empower your best career. Learn how they're helping to create a more transparent workplace for all of us at glassdoor.com/progress. This week on Insecure, we catch up with Issa Nathan reconvening after that very awkward night at her apartment. And of course, we have some thoughts. Dr. Donna Oriowo is back with me to chat about what we saw this week and where we might be headed. If you missed her before, Dr. Oriowo is an author, international speaker, and certified sex and relationship therapist in the Washington, D.C. metro area. She's the owner of A Nod Right and specializes in working with Black women on issues related to colorism and texturism and its impact on mental and sexual health. She's also the author of Cocoa Butter and Hair Grease, a self-love journey through hair and skin. She and I chatted about the difficulties with communication that persists with Issa and Nathan, the tension between who Nathan is now and who he might have been in the past, and what the future might hold for them. This episode does contain spoilers, so if you haven't watched the latest episode, save this conversation until you've had a chance to watch. And share your thoughts with us on social media about the episode. Make sure to use the hashtag TBGInSession. Here's our conversation. Let's set the stage, right? Let's set the stage. So the episode opens with the beach event, right? So this is what Nathan and Issa, of course, had talked about earlier in the season, that he wanted to do some kind of like customer appreciation thing maybe for the customers from the barber shop. And so we see them at the beach, him and his friends or the fellow barbers putting on their sunscreen, which actually was only lotion, right? So with the lamps start pretty immediately. So that's our setting. And so he and the friends are setting up, and then we see Issa and Molly and Kelly show up a little later. And it is very clear that Issa and Nathan have not talked since a week ago, a week ago was the crying incident where she asked him to spend the night and they were kissing and she ended up crying in his mouth. So what we see is that like there is this awkwardness, right? So very much a callback to Awkward Black Girl and early seasons of Insecure. Like Issa, I feel like has continued to be at different levels of awkward, but I feel like this was like peak awkward this week.
Yeah, it was physically painful to watch. I just like, ow. I'm like, come on, girl, spit it out. Oh, please don't say that, please.
It was very painful to watch. So what do you kind of make of the fact that clearly they have not talked in this week and, you know, she just kind of shows up at this event?
Honestly, I just like, okay, are we being passive here? are we wanting to have the conversation? And there was this like desire for her to have the conversation. And I mean, you saw it.
Right. This is the continuing theme.
Because exactly. I was just like, this felt like a communication episode where the previous episode was how they're not talking and how that lack of communication was messing things up. You see it start in this space, but you also get to see them do more progression into the sort of conversations that they wanted to be having. And I think it was just like this piece around not wanting to look a certain way. And I felt like maybe that's what this was about, like how we see ourselves, how we desire for others to see us, and how they actually see us. I felt like this was the theme of this particular episode, just the juxtaposition of what we see about ourselves, what we know about ourselves, and what other people also know about us.
Definitely. I mean, and as the episode progresses, like you said, we do see them move deeper into having like more of the conversation that it feels like they should have been having. But I still don't know that we all the way got there.
No, we did not. But I feel like they really opened the door toward it, especially at the end. Like, I feel like that for me was such a vulnerability type moment, to willingly put your cards down on the table, not knowing how it is going to be received, but being able to state, this is the thing that I want. Because I felt like they were talking about their missed communication spaces, right? Like, they were like, well, I expected you to be there when I woke up. And it's just like, oh, I didn't know that we had expectations for each other. And I'm just like, boom, how many of y'all living that life? Because a lot of people are, where we have expectations for someone else that we have never stated to them. And so when they behave in the way that we behave, we butt hurt. We got all these feelings about it. And your feelings are neither right nor wrong. They're just feelings. They're just information to let you know that something works or does not work for you. But I'm like, the person is not wrong because of what they did. You had an expectation of them that was unstated. And if you state your desire, now they have a choice of whether or not they would like to meet your desire. Otherwise, they're just going to meet their own thing, which may be a completely opposing desire.
Yeah, and I think we very much see that both Issa and Nathan have ideas in their head about like how this relationship with the other person is going to operate that they're not actually communicating, right? Because if we even back up to Issa inviting Nathan over, so clearly we had all of that stuff with the show she did, and so she was feeling, I think, very overwhelmed, and so she wanted some support, and she asked Nathan to come over, but then she asked him to spend the night. And so in my mind, that is like some expectation that, she maybe has, but that she has not clearly communicated to him. And then he accepts the invitation, and then we see her crying. And so I think I'm just wondering, like, how are they going to be able to move forward? Because we see them both being very avoidant of this communication. So what do we think that this is going to look like? And like, how might they work a little better to be more open to communication if this relationship is to progress?
Honestly, I feel like if there was going to be anyone who would be able to move toward healthier communication, it's them. I'm thinking back to when they first were meeting each other. I believe he might have been in a manic space at that time, but the communication and the vibe was, it was great. And during this time where, he came back from ghosting and basically apologized to earn her trust back, to even be her friend. All of this has been, a trust exercise and trying to increase the communication and the transparency between them, which they were doing successfully. It is because both of them had a desire to pivot their relationship that things became murky again. And I think that some of that is because we've been taught that if you are particularly in a romantic relationship, you don't have to be as clear that the other person should just know.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mind read. You should just know that if you was really vibing with me, if you was really feeling me, then you would know. And I think that when we are not intentional, we fall back into patterns of communication that maybe not have served us well in the past, but certainly are the patterns of communication in which we have been taught we're supposed to be in when we are looking for a specific type of situation. So I think it's both them. They didn't know how to pivot, and they didn't know how to state it to the other and whether or not the other would be receptive to the pivot that they were wanting to make.
Yeah, I mean, because clearly, Issa was ready to invite, more than just a friendship when she asked him to spend the night, but there had been no communication. So we see him come over expecting kind of to just show up as in the friend space, and she is, of course, now open to more. Now, I do think though it is also important to think about, given how we saw Nathan behave before with just the ghosting, I would imagine that him being gone that next morning woke that back up for Issa, right? Like, oh gosh, here we go again. But I'm wondering, how could Nathan have supported Issa from a friendship angle when she clearly was upset that night?
I think that he should have expected to be in a friendship angle. And I think that he did. And when she pivoted, he tried to meet her in that pivot. He's just like, oh, snap. I get the chance that I was asking for before. It seems like we may actually be on the same page. And then, the crying and all that, it's like, oh, snap. And he did apologize. He's just like, you know what? I don't know that you were ready, and we probably should have been clear. I mean, I don't think he said all those words. I think I put those words in his mouth. But, but the part where he apologized for kissing her, and she apologized in turn for asking him to stay over. I feel like those were incomplete apologies, because they're apologizing for the thing, but really what they're apologizing for is the intention behind the thing. So they're stating the obvious, but they're not talking about the intention that was behind it, that they are wanting to really say, I apologize for not telling you my intention as to why I asked you to sleep over. And I am sorry for not stating that I was looking for something deeper with you when I kissed you. I'm like, you're giving a half apology. And that was still indicative of really like halfway communication, because he definitely took it some type of way. Like, oh, you sorry for inviting me to stay over? Oh, so you really don't fuck with me. And I think that they're having these individual narratives right. that are based on their own insecurities. Haha, insecure. Because they are feeling uncertain and unbalanced, they are also not being vulnerable with one another to be able to open up the other door to the deeper communication that they were almost attempting to have, but didn't appropriately have until the end of the episode.
Yeah. So, as you were talking, it made me think, I wonder, like, maybe Issa had been going back and forth in her mind about, like, was she going to try to open up this door with Nathan again? But I wonder if her inviting him over wasn't necessarily with the intent to, like, be romantic with him, right? Like, I think she was feeling, again, overwhelmed and had some feelings around everything that had happened with Crenshaw and all of that stuff. And so she wanted some support. And then he got there in the moment and, like, she changed her mind or, like, became more open to that possibility.
Yeah. I was wondering about that myself, because I'm just like, well, there's a piece of it that feels like when you are in, I guess, your most vulnerable moment, who do you turn to? And I think that the person that you turn to usually is indicative of what the situation is, because I think that we turn to different people in different moments. But that is the person that she wanted. I'm wondering if that even may have surprised her at all, to be like, oh, I want to be around him. I want his energy.
Something to consider to think about.
I think that when I'm looking at like Issa's relationships, one of the ones that has like beautiful reciprocity is with Nathan. Like, especially in this time where they've been friends, there has been reciprocity there. And I think that's also what we like about the relationship between Issa and Molly, the reciprocity that we see, where it's not one person constantly taking and the other person constantly giving. That's draining. And I know that people were rooting for Issa and Lawrence, and I think that they got to a space where they could have had some reciprocity, but if we harken back to where we started, there was none, and that was the problem.
Right. So I agree. Like, I think it was season 3 where we saw him actually apologize and then disclose the information about his bipolar disorder. Like, I definitely think like that took their relationship to a new level. There was huge vulnerability there. So you're right. I do think that especially in these couple of seasons where we've seen them develop this friendship, it has been really beautiful. And I think that's probably why she did call him, because it does feel like he is the person she calls for this more like work creative kind of thing, right? Like Molly is typically who she calls for relationship stuff, but it does seem like she's really leaned on Nathan for this like work frustration and creative, kind of thing. And so I think it did make sense that he was the one that she called. And, like we saying, maybe she was even surprised by the feelings that she felt once he actually showed up to support her.
And I'm also thinking like the pivot that she's made in her life, her work is integrated into her life now.
Mm-hmm.
When she was at the other space, it was like work was separate from her life. Like she had to be there. And so she was, but she was dissatisfied. And I think that in building a life that she wants and building the business that she wants, it is differently integrated into her life. And because it's differently integrated into her life, like Nathan is part of the catalyst for the work. Right. And she acknowledges that, like, I was blowing in the wind, now I got roots. And there's a piece of her that will probably always appreciate Nathan.
Mm-hmm. More from my conversation with Dr. Oriowo after the break. This segment is sponsored by Novo Nordisk. It's easy to get down on ourselves about our weight. That's because we tend to see weight regain or lack of weight loss as a personal failing. But it's important to take a step back and look at what is happening culturally around us. For instance, the pandemic. For the past year and some change, there have been so many new things to navigate. The kids have been home doing virtual school, your dining room has become your office, and the things that you used to turn to for relaxation, like massages and working out at the gym, have largely been taken away. With so many changes and the anxiety of the pandemic, it's really easy to do things like snack because you're bored or stressed. Chips are my go-to. Or opt to watch your favorite show instead of going out for a walk. I'm sure you can relate to that. But the bottom line is, a lot of us struggle with taking care of ourselves because there was so much happening. And naturally, it led to weight gain and weight regain. Struggles related to a lack of access to healthy food make it more challenging to lose weight and maintain weight loss. When it's easier to get processed foods than fruits and vegetables, of course this will impact how you eat and ultimately your weight. But there's also a science behind weight loss and weight regain. When we lose weight, changes in our body's appetite hormones can make us feel hungrier. This causes us to eat more and regain the weight we lost. And it also makes weight management that much more difficult. So it's easy to feel stuck in a cycle of weight loss and regain. In fact, people living with excess weight generally make 7 serious attempts to lose weight over time. 7. And while diet and exercise are our familiar go-tos and are important, they aren't the only parts of your weight loss plan. Weight management is much more complex than what we eat and how we move. It's physiology too, probably more than anything else. That's why it's important to partner with a healthcare provider to create a weight management plan that works for you. It should be someone you trust and someone you feel comfortable talking with, because you shouldn't ever feel embarrassed about excess weight or let anyone else make you feel less than. Once you find a healthcare provider you feel comfortable with, you can work together to develop a weight management plan that is right for you. Watch HBO Max's new comedy series, The Sex Lives of College Girls, now streaming. From the ever-clever Mindy Kaling comes a sex-positive comedy about 4 relatable, diverse young women who stumble toward adulthood as they dive into new experiences, like naked parties, airbrushed abs, and caution tape dresses, refusing to be shamed for any of it. No rules, no regrets. Watch The Sex Lives of College Girls, now streaming only on HBO Max. This podcast is supported by Glassdoor. At Glassdoor, they see the workplace as a work in progress, building toward pay transparency, diversity, equity, and inclusion with tools that encourage open conversations among employees as well as job seekers. Find salaries, reviews, ratings, and more so you can ask for what you deserve. Then, get the inside scoop about companies and their culture, and join a trusted community that gives you the power to grow your best career. We've come a long way in the workplace, and yet we're just getting started. Learn how they're creating a more transparent workplace at glassdoor.com/progress. But I do find myself, and I think other people are also feeling this, like, can Issa get a new slate of booze, right? Because it does feel like we kind of go Like, is there just only this one store
Word.
to find booze
We don't need to
in
shop in
the
the
LA
past.
area? So I think we go back and forth like, okay, do we want her and Lawrence together? Do we want her and Nathan together? And so I think it does beg an important question around, like, when might we consider going back to an ex?
There's a piece that wants to say, like, oh, well, you dumped this person for a reason. The question is whether or not you're willing to dig into the reasons, if you're willing to have the conversations about all the reasons that you broke up, not just on your own, and really consider where things have gotten off track or where they got misaligned or blah, blah, blah. A lot of us, because we are in a space of villainizing the person that we were with, sometimes in an effort to move forward, but also because some of us, we think that they are the only one in the wrong, period. We never look at where we tripped. We never look at how we contributed. So we don't even have the type of growth that would allow us to have a remix relationship with somebody because we don't know how to remix. But like, I think about like the way that my partner and I were able to come back. This was
Mm-hmm.
months, plural, of hashing it out, of where we went wrong, about what he needed from me, about what I needed from him, about what he needed for himself, what I needed for myself, about talking about the direction that we are moving in our lives and being open, honest, vulnerable about it. That was
Mm.
hella work. And I don't know that a lot of people do that type of work when they decide that they want to
Yes.
remix anything. We don't look about what didn't work. We just like, well, I'm new now. I'm looking like y'all be too many people be on that new year, new me. I'm looking like, no, it's a new year. It's
Yes.
still you though. And there's nothing wrong with it being still you.
Yeah, and your earlier point around like why Issa maybe even called Nathan that night anyway, right? And like the growth that she's seen, I think that that probably is what may be leading her to perhaps like have another opportunity with Nathan, right? But I think the communication pieces that we've already talked about may make it difficult for them to have these kinds of conversations like you're talking about needs to be had before we really even consider like, okay, am I going to try this with this person again? Because we said the end we see them in this beautiful shot gazing over LA, right? And it looks like, okay, they both say we don't want to be just friends, so maybe we are gonna try something else. But again, how many steps have been skipped for us to now just say, okay, we're gonna like try this romantic angle again?
You can start with the declaration. Just don't forget the other work that you actually got
Yes,
to do.
all over the place.
You should be unpacking. If y'all are going to try again, you need to unpack. The same way that they began, Issa began to do
Right.
with Lawrence, there was an unpacking that was going on. And I'm just like, well, how are you going to unpack with Nathan? Because certainly you're able to see
Mm-hmm.
the value
Mm-hmm.
that he brought into your life. And
Right.
I love the way that she just sort of like defended him against his cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked to me that in that moment, Nathan felt seen
Right.
as opposed to being the person that he was seen for the person that he is in this moment and seen
Right.
even through what his mental health had sort of produced for him, especially in the lives of
Right.
others. But I mean, you can make amends all you want to. It doesn't mean that people accept your amends or that they're able to move forward. So
Mm-hmm.
his cousin definitely gets to have those thoughts and those feelings. But even that piece was about communication and the lack of vulnerability. What I personally
Mm.
did not like is that this dude allowed his wife to be used to protect himself. He used his wife as a shield between himself and Nathan that let her take the heat and be like, she kicked him out rather than I'm telling you
Yeah.
to leave because I don't like the way that things are going in my house. And it's too indicative of how I feel like Black women in particular are just sort
Mm-hmm.
of thrown in the mix when it is going to benefit somebody else. And I feel like the individual
Mm-hmm.
relationship that she would have got to have with his cousin, with Nathan, was disposable. That her character was
Yeah.
disposable so that he could maintain whatever he wanted to maintain.
So, the introduction of this cousin's character, I think, gives us some more insight into maybe what was happening with Nathan. But it also made me think like the difficulties he has with communication, because we don't know like how long he had been struggling with like bipolar symptoms before he actually got the
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis. And so when you think about what those symptoms sometimes look like and the internal experience of somebody who's having bipolar disorder symptoms, I would imagine communication could be difficult, right? Because you're probably feeling very big feelings that don't make sense to you. And then you cannot explain that to other people because it doesn't make sense to you.
Absolutely.
And so, in some ways, yeah, I feel like maybe that is a part of where these communication difficulties come from for him. And so, it also made me think, though, what might we see and like what might we learn or what might we want to see in terms of Issa maybe being able to support him with a bipolar disorder?
This is something that has happened in my therapy room. I don't know if it happens in other folks' therapy room, but what I find is that when a person has a diagnosis, sometimes they invite their partner to come to therapy so that they
Mm-hmm.
can have an understanding of how this thing shows up for
Right.
them, because everything shows up differently for different people. I've had clients bring their mothers, I've had them bring their partners, a friend, so that this friend, this partner is able to understand, like, yo, they have depression, but the depression that you see on TV with these white women is not the depression that they have. It's funny because just this week, Erica Hart had this video where they talked about like falling apart is a privilege, and Black people don't often have the privilege to fall apart. So
Mm-hmm.
depression doesn't look like depression, or anxiety doesn't look like anxiety. It looks like overachieving. It looks like constantly doing.
Yes.
It looks like maybe having a tough time getting out of bed, but they do get out of bed. They do go to
Mm-hmm.
work. Maybe they're a little late, but they still do their work, or, they do their bare minimum, which still ends up exceeding expectations. But it's just like their depression, their anxiety, Black people's self-esteem issues, these things don't always look like what we have been taught that they look like. We try to attribute it to something else that is personalized in the way that it is their fault, as opposed to it being something else that could possibly be going on. And I think that sometimes we want to feel justified in, well, this is just how this type of person is, as opposed to there may have been circumstances that actually led up to this.
Right.
And I feel like this was the cousin's opportunity to remember that he actually loves this man, that he actually
Mm-hmm.
loves Nathan, and that Nathan is actually family. Like, yes, Nathan did things to hurt you, and he is not absolved of those things. And you still get to see him from your lens based on your experiences at this snapshot in time with him. But I think that we forget that that shit is a snapshot. It is one moment, maybe several moments. It is not the entirety of somebody's life. The moment that we meet somebody, they have had something else happen to get them to the moment that they get to be in your presence. And after they leave your presence, they're going to have many more moments to come. I think that we sometimes get so hell bent on punishing somebody for the shit that they did way back when, that they have already apologized for, that they have already attempted to make amends for. We like to throw it back in their face on occasion. And sometimes I wonder, well, what is that saying about us? Why are we wanting to throw that back in their face? Why are we
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to see them be able to move forward?
Yeah. And I think it's important to know that a lot of times like that critical behavior that we have on other people of other people is also internal, right? Like we also are
Yup.
super critical of ourselves in that way, and so it makes it difficult to,
Mean.
yes, it makes it difficult to be gentle and tender with other people when we cannot do that with ourselves. And it
And
comes
that's
from
the one thing that
somewhere.
I want for us. I
Yes.
want us to be gentle with ourselves,
Mhm.
to be nurturing of ourselves, to love on us in a different way. I feel like
Right.
a lot of us have been taught tough love or brutal honesty. And I'm just like,
Mhm.
who told you honesty needed to be brutal?
Right. Where did that
Like,
come from?
where did you pick that up?
Yeah.
Go put it back.
Return to sender. Thank you.
And there's so many like little ways that these things show up. And this is the part where people groan, because I say a lot of that shit you receive from white supremacist
Yep.
patriarchy, and we don't even see how we continue to replicate that in our daily damn lives. the inability to see people for what they actually are because we have an agenda or because we have a chip on our shoulder. Tell me that ain't white supremacy in action.
More from my conversation with Dr. Oriowo after the break. Watch HBO Max's new comedy series, The Sex Lives of College Girls, now streaming. From the ever-clever Mindy Kaling comes a sex-positive comedy about 4 relatable, diverse young women who stumble toward adulthood as they dive into new experiences, like naked parties, airbrushed abs, and caution tape dresses, refusing to be shamed for any of it. No rules, no regrets. Watch The Sex Lives of College Girls, now streaming only on HBO Max.
Hola, mi gente. This is Amara La Negra, host of Exactly Amara podcast, part of iHeartRadio's My Cultura podcast network. You may know me from my music and the reality show Love and Hip Hop Miami, but now you can subscribe, download, and listen to my wild and crazy podcast show for free. I've got a lot of sazon and a lot to say, and I'm spilling it all. I explore topics like dating, sex, relationships, social media, body positivity, mi vida on television, and my upbringings. Get to know who I am, my ups, my downs, y las cosas que me emocionan tanto. Listen to Exactly Amara on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
There's a reason podcasts are popping up everywhere. Podcasts can make you money. And Spreaker is the easiest way to start a podcast. You could literally record your first episode today. Spreaker has all the tools you need to record, edit, publish, and yeah, monetize your podcast all in one place. And it's free. So tell your story and make money while doing it. Start your podcast for free now at Spreaker.com/make money. That's SPREAKER.com/make money from the iHeart Podcast Network.
So, the thing that we haven't, to get back to Nathan, the thing that we have not seen, though, is any real conversation about like what his treatment has looked like, right? So he told Issa, and I don't remember what the time frame was of like how long before he told Issa he had gotten that diagnosis, but we don't know anything about like, is he working with a therapist? Is he on medication? And we also, at least at this point, I think can kind of be certain, or at least a good guess, that like Issa may be the only one, and maybe Andrew, who we really haven't seen or have not seen at all this season, are the only ones who know about this diagnosis. And so, we hear Nathan say like, I want people to see me for who I am now, not who I was then, but he actually hasn't told his cousin and his wife about what is happening, right? And so he hasn't informed them.
And I think that's because he doesn't see them the way they are now.
What do you mean?
Ironically enough, they kicked you out of the house and you won't be vulnerable enough to be like, hey, this is what was going on at that time. I don't know that he feels like they fostered a sense that a space that allows him to be vulnerable either.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just like, well, you want them to see you differently, but there's really been no new input. I mean, Issa didn't even know that these people lived here. She's thinking they visited.
Right.
So that means that you have not been visiting with him, and certainly not visiting with him in a way that you talk about it. And maybe they were avoiding him as much as he was avoiding them or what have you, because, all this lovely water under the bridge.
Yeah, you make a good point there. Yeah, and it seems like, again, what Nathan thinks he's communicating is not actually what's being communicated because they're not actually talking. So in my mind, it feels like maybe he invited the cousin and his wife to this like barbecue or whatever to show that he's reliable now, right? Like, I got my stuff together. And so now they will just see that I'm different and not like, flaky, quote unquote, like I was when I lived with them. So is there anything else that we haven't covered on this idea of like not being able to change how other people perceive us? Because Nathan, I think, says that a couple of times in this episode, and Issa agrees, like this idea that like you might be a new person, but other people might not see you that way. Like, are there suggestions you have around like how to reconcile this past you with this present you?
Honestly, the part where Issa said about waiting for the other shoe to drop, I was just like, if that ain't your past self and your current self warring with one another.
Spider-Man meme.
Yes. Word. I just be like, ooh, we are in the multiverse of madness here. It's almost like you're doing the thing to yourself that other people are doing to you when they can't see you for where you are. And I think part of it is because we don't tend to live a very mindful life. I think that we go through the motions and we don't even think about it. half of us get to work and we're not even sure how we got there because we were paying no attention. We move in autopilot, and we're moving in the type of autopilot where we don't even try to sort of dig back in. Maybe not that we don't try, but that some of us are unable to even dig back in, to be mindful, to be awake and open in the moment. We just sort of go through things and we're barely present for it.
You know, I think especially in this time frame in a pandemic, right, where so much was like pulled from us so quickly and we're still trying to figure out how to make sense of stuff. Are there other suggestions you have for people who kind of had that feeling of always waiting for the other shoe to drop?
I would say take the moment to reflect on when the first shoe fell, because if you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, then one shoe has already fallen. What were the circumstances then? What are the similarities and the differences between where you are now and where you were then? Once shoe has fell, do you feel like you have the skills to deal with another shoe dropping? Because it can rain shoes all your life. And for me, it's about how we allow ourselves space to pivot. It's not a failure that the other shoe fell. It sort of reminds me of what Dr. Jetta Robinson would say about like anticipatory grief. You can anticipate it all day. You can worry about it in advance and plan for it in advance. But when it actually happens, it's still going to hit different. I can plan for it and move it aside and allow myself to live, to be in the moment and to enjoy the things that bring me joy, to hone in on my desires and live a life that is full of pleasure, to do things that I actually enjoy doing and wanting to share that with the people around me. Because that anticipatory piece that I'm going to live for this other shoe to drop stops you from living in the moment, stops you from being present, stops you from having the experiences that you actually want to have.
So we will wrap up here because I know you have to get back to your evening. We will, of course, be staying tuned for everything else that will unfold this season. It's always such a pleasure catching up with Dr. Oriowo to chat about one of our favorite shows. To learn more about her and her work, be sure to visit the show notes, and don't forget to text 2 of your girls and tell them to check out the episode as well. If you're looking for a therapist in your area, be sure to check out our therapist directory at therapyforblackgirls.com/directory. And if you want to continue digging into this topic or just be in community with other sisters, come on over and join us in the Sister Circle. It's our cozy corner of the internet designed just for Black women. You can join us at community.therapyforblackgirls.com. Thank y'all so much for joining me again this week. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you all real soon. Take good care. When it comes to building a working world that is diverse, equal, inclusive, and fair, we've come a long way, and yet we're just getting started. Now Glassdoor helps to create a more transparent workplace with tools that encourage open conversations among employees as well as job seekers. Get the inside scoop about salaries and company culture, and join an open conversation in a trusted community that can help empower your best career. Learn how they're helping to create a more transparent workplace for all of us at glassdoor.com/progress.
I want to get back to kissing the cheeks of my grandbabies, making Sunday dinner with a house full of family and lots of laughs.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. But now there are vaccines, and they are the very first step that let us get back to what we miss most. It's okay to have questions.
Is it safe?
Should I wait? Now, get the facts. Visit getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
There's a reason podcasts are popping up everywhere. Podcasts can make you money. And Spreaker is the easiest way to start a podcast. You could literally record your first episode today. Spreaker has all the tools you need to record, edit, publish, and monetize your podcast all in one place. And it's free. So tell your story and make money while doing it. Start your podcast for free now at Spreaker.com/make money. That's SPREAKER.com/make money from the iHeart Podcast Network.